This video comes to you from the Tech Comm department at UNT. In our course on the profession, we invited an industry guest to talk to our students about the tools that professionals use. So we're going to join John as he's talking to students.
So the title of the presentation is appropriately named Tools for Tech Writers. My name's John, and I'm a senior content designer, currently working for Atlassian. I work on a product called Bitbucket. That's my Twitter handle right there. I'll have my social information at the end for people to copy down and get in contact later. Atlassian, I don't know if anyone's familiar with the tools that we make. Most people have not heard of us. If you have, there's usually a product called Jira that people have heard of that's really awesome. It's kind of bug tracking and issue tracking software that's really fantastic. It's kind of changed the way software gets built. But I won't harp too much about Atlassian because it's not really the focus. It's about tech writing. But give you a little bit of background about what I've been doing with my career. I can officially say I think I'm over 11 years of technical writing experience across a variety of industries, mostly in defense. I did a little bit of in the energy industry. I even did video games for a bit. But once I found a home in software, that's where I really found my groove. And it's where I currently find myself working for Atlassian. But along the way, I've also called myself many different things, including and not limited to word processor, technical writer, content designer, information experience writer, and a lot of other weird things in between. I also have written for a variety of audiences, from general lay people, everyday people, to very technical documentation for developers and people who write code. So it started off even before I graduated in a class just like the one you're in. I put my resume online actually as part of an assignment from one of my tech writing teachers. And within a couple of weeks, I had someone contact me from Siemens about a contractor technical writing position. And the rest is history. I didn't look back. I actually slowed down my course of study so that I can continue working and turn a lot of those hours that I was getting paid for into internship credit. And in turn, finally graduated in 2008 from University of Central Florida, and did the defense thing for a while, which is in Orlando. It's pretty much the bread and butter for most technical writers, and it's fine. It's not a bad job to have. It's just not the most exciting. And I was actually trying to find a way to move out of Florida. So after I got my first job in software, I decided to cling to it for dear life. And eventually found myself getting a job offer from a company called Atlassian that actually was headquartered in Sydney, Australia. And Atlassian paid for me, my wife, and 3 kids to move across the world to Australia so that I could be a senior technical writer for them. And I lived in Australia for about 3 years. And from there, Atlassian paid for me again to move across the world to San Francisco so that I can be a little bit closer to home and try to reap some of the benefits of being in the state of California. So that's where I find myself now. This is a gross simplification of my career so far, but I feel like it hits the highlights. And in between, up until Atlassian, I'd had 10 different employers over 10 years. Now that seems kind of shocking, especially when you say it out loud, but it's actually, you can expect lots of competition, but there's also lots of opportunity, especially when you start to specialize. And you can specialize either on tools, on processes, or on certain industries. All right. Now, when you become a technical writer, you have to understand that there's a certain expectation about your writing aptitude, that you'll have to always do a writing test, or they'll want to see samples. And if you don't nail those things, obviously it'll be difficult to get an offer or to find a job. But those kinds of things are usually expected of almost all technical writing or content related positions. That your writing aptitude is supposed to speak for itself, and it won't be the type of thing that you have to prove over and over again. Now, the tools that you know, that's a different story, because that can make or break whether you get an offer or whether you end up adding zeros to the end of your paycheck. And what you know about those tools can be categorized different types of knowledge. And I actually kind of was able to articulate this by looking through the TOC from one of the textbooks that your professor is assigned to you, which I think actually are pretty good. They're pretty good. I had a good skim through them. I didn't actually purchase them yet, but they seem like they know what they're talking about. And they kind of harp on this a little bit as well. And so the first type of knowledge is the kind of more traditional knowledge that you'll be required to know as any kind of technical communicator, and that's about knowing the thing that you're working on. Whatever it is you're documenting, you're not usually responsible for knowing it inside and out, but it does help. But that type of knowledge tends to be very specialized and very focused, a little bit narrow, and is usually very specific to whatever role or company you're working for. The second type of knowledge, I think, is more interesting, is about the craft of technical communication and how you use tools to create the kind of help, support text that people use every day. And that's probably what I'll be talking most about during the rest of the presentation. Yeah, so the domain knowledge is not actually required. You don't have to know that walking in the door. It does help you get an interview when you have those kinds of things on your resume, but it's not expected of you, especially not when you're at an entry level or a kind of beginning level of your career. And as I mentioned before, but it varies greatly by industry. For instance, when I was working in defense, a lot of the defense contractors are using XML to output PDF manuals or to output digital ebooks and things like that. So specializing in XML authoring tools is always a good idea for people who are in that domain. Actually, sorry, that's more about tools. So actually, the things I was documenting as a technical writer in defense was like helicopter simulators, firefighting simulators, anti-tank weaponry, all kinds of things like that. So it's about the actual product. Whereas at Atlassian, I'm responsible for documenting Bitbucket, which is it's Git software that developers use to store and manage their code. So the domain knowledge is going to vary wildly from position to position, even within the same company. Now, craft knowledge is the stuff that you can do on your own and can be applicable across industries and even across companies, even within the same role. Sometimes we use different tools to do the same thing at Atlassian. And there's a handful of tools that you'll kind of be expected to know, and I call them core tools. And they're the type of things that if you don't know them, it could be to your own detriment, but you're not usually expected to be an expert. And that's another thing I like to always stress to technical communication students. You don't have to be an expert to put a tool on your resume or in your LinkedIn profile. And actually, I think that if you wait till you're an expert to put it on your profile, you're actually missing out on letting recruiters know what you're actually capable of. I always say if you know enough to find out how to get help, and you know enough on how to navigate the interface on your own, then you should be able to put that on your LinkedIn profile or your resume with confidence. And doing so is a great way to get more SEO value and search results for recruiters. And finally, craft knowledge varies by industry. And again, like I mentioned before, in DoD for defense work, XML authoring tools are all the rage. Whereas where I work at Atlassian, we won't touch XML authoring tools with the 9-yard pole. It's just too much of an investment for not enough payoff. We're too agile, and things change too quickly for us to make that kind of a commitment to an infrastructure like that. But it's still applicable to know those kinds of things because we work in a very software technical oriented business. So you see there's some crossover there. So it's not that some things aren't valuable, it's that you find your niche or something that you enjoy and you kind of drill down into it, and then you can make that your specialty, and then it makes you more valuable as a technical writer. All right, on to the good stuff. I tried to figure out the best way to go over the types of tools. I wondered if it was best to do it the way that the tools that I use on a regular basis, but that seemed a bit too narrow. So I went a little bit more broad and kind of categorized them according to type. And I figure if we have any questions about that, we can drill in a little bit more if I can remember to leave some time towards the end. But the one thing that's guaranteed is that the tools will always change. And then if you get married to one tool for too long, you sometimes can risk growing old and become obsolete. I mean, it's always good to try to focus in on and be a specialist, but it's also just as important to be curious and to be open to learning new things. And just remember that don't get too married to one tool because it's always inevitably going to change. All right, so again, not all tools are valued equally. And this is just a couple of the metrics I use to evaluate tools. I'll fly through them real quick. Applicability, it's mostly about how broad a use case you can use a tool for. Something like Microsoft Word can be used for just about anything. You create a Word document, usually for print or to share with somebody, just to disseminate information. It's pretty straightforward. Whereas FrameMaker, on the other hand, is a bit more specialized and is used for all kinds of authoring and for lots of special and specific outputs. And also, there's complexity. There's some tools that are just darn simple to use, and you can it's an attribute to their well-designed interface. And there's other tools that are extremely complex to use, and so they sacrifice the bit of simplicity for power. What Oxygen can do, there's a lot of tools that will replicate it, but not with the same kind of interface. It's all collected in one place. They're trade-offs. And there's also availability. I know that you're all students and that most students don't tend to have the kind of budgets where they can afford fancy software. So I figured talking about availability is important as well. I'm a big proponent of open source software and freeware whenever possible. And I always have good alternatives to most paid proprietary software. But in the end, your employer should be paying for that stuff anyway. All right, so this is the big three for me: word processors, help authoring tools, and image editors. If you know these three things, you can pretty much be prepared. Or if you know at least one type of tool in each one of these domains, you can pretty much guarantee you'll be competitive in the technical writing job market. Word processors like Microsoft Word and Google Docs are all pretty straightforward. Their value proposition is pretty easy to get, and that anybody can use them. They're great for the kind of documents that everybody expects that most customers will probably be familiar with and they won't complain about. But they're not super interesting. And to be honest with you, a lot of people don't even use them the right way. So if you end up working for an employer that's using these in the wrong way, it can be just as frustrating as using it the right way. It is gratifying. Next, help authoring tools. I can't pretend like I have a lot of experience with these, but I'd be doing a disservice if I didn't at least mention them. These are the two industry leaders according to a lot of research I did, especially from a blog named Tom Johnson, who runs a really great blog called I'd Rather Be Writing, which you do really well to get on his subscription list. And they talk about this a lot there, but I don't really use these in my day-to-day job, so I won't harp on it for too long. Image editing tools are a dime a dozen, and there's all kinds of different options out there, but these are the big ones for me. I use Snagit and GIMP on a regular basis. Snagit is a screen capture tool. It just works. It's not super expensive, but it does cost money, whereas most computers come with a screenshotting tool built into it. It kind of extends that functionality and has some fun presets that help speed things up. And it's a big part of your job as a software technical writer to take screenshots of desktops and interfaces to use in your documentation. And of course, there's Photoshop. It's a little pricey for my taste, and I actually prefer GIMP, even if I had a Photoshop license. I think it's just about my familiarity with it. But GIMP is a free and open source alternative, and just recently got an update, so it's actually much nicer now. And I give you all a strong encouragement to give that a run if you ever found yourself in the need for Photoshop, or your Photoshop free trial ran out, or your education trial ran out. Go with GIMP. You can't do much worse. It's a great tool. Now, once we get the core tools out of the way, specialized tools, I think, are even more interesting. But I find that you can usually categorize the specialized tools into four groups, depending on what kind of role that you're in, the type of technical writing role that is. And I'll go just a little bit more into that right at the end, because I think it's probably the most interesting thing that's happening in our field, is the kind of evolution of job titles amongst technical writers and technical communicators. And so I'll touch on that briefly right at the end. So the first type of tool are UX design tools, and they're the things that designers use to get their jobs done. But when you have to work closely with the designers, like a lot of technical writers do in software, you do really well to know these tools, because you'll end up having to go to these tools to do your job, to iterate, and to give feedback. Sketch is the industry standard for mockups and wireframes. It is a wonderful tool. I don't even remember how much it costs. I don't remember how approachable it is, but it's fantastic. It's got lots of libraries and a very robust ecosystem of people building things to extend it and change it and make it more useful for writers and for designers. And InVision is just great for prototyping. I think they have a free version of InVision Studio that's really worthwhile, where you can kind of create pictures of a UI and then actually make the functionality work by creating little hyperlinks like buttons and little interactions with with interfaces. So it can make you feel like you're a designer and a programmer in no time. I use these two tools on a regular basis at Atlassian, mostly because I work with a lot of designers and developer tools. So there's a whole section of technical writing that's mostly about writing documentation for developers. APIs are application programming interfaces are ways for two different apps to talk to each other and share information. It's how you can log into Facebook, or you can use Facebook to log into a different website by using the Facebook API. Well, there's programmers who are writing the code that does that functionality, but technical writers who are writing the instructions on how to use the APIs and the types of descriptions of the data that you can consume and generate using APIs. So there's a whole suite of tools just around writing and creating documentation in code bases. So your editor will look very much like just code with lots of snippets of HTML and JavaScript, and you'll be writing it in Markdown using a text editor. Then you'll end up having to check your code in, and just like a developer would, into something like Git and something like GitHub using Git, which is just version control. If this all seems interesting to you, I would always say that this is probably the most lucrative and the most in-demand section of technical communication right now. If you put the words API on your LinkedIn profile, even if you know nothing about it, you'll suddenly start getting visitors visiting your profile because it's just that important right now. I say give it a shot and double down on it, especially if you can do even a little bit of HTML or some CSS. You don't have to know how to actually program. You just need to know enough to be dangerous to create little code snippets and to understand what's going on. And there's lots of fun tutorials out there that can teach you how to do that stuff. And again, it's super lucrative. Also, not to be a homer, but these are two tools made by my company, and they're probably the best out there. Trello is actually free. If you haven't heard of it, if you've never used it before, you should go sign up for it like as soon as you get off the phone with this conference, because it's a great tool for tracking projects. You can create swim lanes for moving cards around. It'd be a wonderful thing for a very busy college student to help keep track of their assignments. And it's also, once you use Trello in your personal life, you can then put it on your LinkedIn profile as project management software. These are things that you should be doing in your day-to-day life, is finding ways to incorporate these tools to get the experience that you might not otherwise get until you get on the job. Because it's not dishonest to say that you now have experience with these tools if you've only used them in your personal life. That's still legit, and that still holds up in an interview. And actually, it kind of makes you a bit more interesting because it's not a very conventional use case for it. And Jira is just kind of our flagship product. It's like Trello on steroids. It's got workflows and custom fields and all kinds of stuff. And tends to be overwhelming for most lay people, but for anybody who's into tech, Jira is it's a gold mine of productivity stuff. Like, it's great for tracking issues and projects. And these are things that companies now look for. Putting this on your resume really makes you more desirable and marketable. Finally, again, I don't do too much of this in my day-to-day work, but some of my colleagues do, mostly because they have a different kind of motivation than I do. I write for developers, and they don't like watching videos, so I don't usually make them too much. But these are, I have used iMovie before personally for my own little trailers and things like that, my home movies. And I know a lot of writers who use it also because it's pretty straightforward. And if you already live in the Mac world, you couldn't do much worse. And Camtasia is also the industry standard, made by the same people that make Snagit. And lots of bloggers talk about how great this stuff is, and you do well to use that, especially if you want to do instructional design, or if you want to specialize and to be the type of person that does video instructions, because that's still technical communication. It's teaching users how to get help, how to accomplish a task or use a product. You're just doing it through video instead of the written word. So don't pigeonhole yourself in a box with technical writing. Yeah, I kind of touched on these during the presentation, that there's all different types of names that technical writers go by now. Find a niche or a specialty and dig in. I've said it several times, and I mean it. It's the best way you can find a way to never have to look for a job again. The recruiters will find you if you can put these things on your resume. I guarantee it. Content strategy and information architecture are not that new, but they're kind of new as specialized roles. And if you're into taxonomy and words and how information is classified, indexes and things like that, go for it. Information architecture is it will be very, very lucrative and will be around forever because we're just churning out so much data. It's great to have people who know how to sort it and classify it. And content strategists are the big picture people. Instead of writing, individual tasks and procedures, you're thinking about what types of content needs to be written for what types of audience and what's the story that everyone should be writing. Creating style guides and a platform of content. That's what content strategy is all about, and it's a lot of fun. I already mentioned the other two types, so I'll wrap up by leaving my social media information. Usually with John Paz and tech writing, any form of those words together in Google search, you can get a hold of me on any one of the platforms. But these are the four that I'm most active on, not least of which is Quora, which is my guilty pleasure, which is great for budding technical writers to get some experience writing instructions for people who have no idea what they're doing. And that's it.
And John, I hope I'll get the chance to talk to you again. I really appreciate your generosity.
Bye, guys. It was my pleasure. Thank you so much for inviting me.